Lori Jayne serves what is unequivocally the most famous steak frites in all of New York City. Priced at only $27, the dish is a bargain. The restaurant also serves a variety of other food, which I had to try as well and find out if Lori Jayne and their steak frites especially live up to the hype.
Beautiful day today here in the fine neighborhood of Bushwick, Brooklyn. In fact, it's so nice out that I walked around this entire park twice and I still couldn't find an empty space on a bench to sit down and film this intro. As a result, I am standing up, which is completely fine because I could stand to burn some calories because I ate a hell of a lot of food for my dinner tonight. I went to a spot which serves what is unequivocally the most viral and popular steak frites dish in all of New York City. I am talking about Lori Jayne. Lori Jayne got popular not only for how good their steak frites dish is, but for how affordable it is. I believe at one point the dish could be had for as little as $20. Now, unfortunately, that price has risen in the last couple of years, but it's understandable. There's been some serious inflation going on. However, even today, the steak frites is offered at a very affordable price. And affordability is one of the main reasons why I went to Lori Jayne today. You see, I spent a very serious chunk of change on this brand new lens that I'm filming on right now, and so far I am loving the lens. It was on sale, but nevertheless, it did make a serious dent in my wallet. So no Michelin-starred tasting menus today, but even regardless of price, the food at Lori Jayne looked spectacular. And with that being said, this was my dinner at Lori Jayne, having the most famous steak frites in all of New York City.
Lori Jayne is located in Bushwick, Brooklyn, but it's not actually a standalone restaurant. It's instead located within a bar called Danger Danger. However, the establishment actually got its start in a different Bushwick bar known as Alphaville back in 2023. The restaurant is the product of chef Sam Braverman, who named the business after his mother. In the beginning, Lori Jayne was all about fried chicken, but it was the affordable $20 steak frites that started merely as a special that made Lori Jayne a viral sensation. This in turn led to a bit of an expansion, with the restaurant briefly maintaining a space at the Time Out Market near Union Square. There's also been talk of Lori Jayne opening a full-service restaurant in Williamsburg. Without question, I was excited to finally see what Lori Jayne was all about, so I arrived to the establishment right when it opened at 5 p.m. for dinner. Upon stepping inside, I took a seat at the bar. Lori Jayne doesn't take reservations, but it was clearly not a problem for me at that time of the day, although the restaurant definitely filled up later. The space had an interesting look to it. It's clearly not a dive bar, but it still had a casual and fun atmosphere with some quirkiness to it. I particularly appreciated the large skylight, which filled the room with pleasing natural light. Since it was a bar, the music was at a high volume, but it wasn't so loud where it would make having a conversation difficult, at least at that time of the evening. Overall, I thought that the place had a good feel to it. Once I was settled, I began to explore the menu. Lori Jayne's offerings are very limited, but what they had certainly intrigued me. It's the type of food that's perfect for a bar. There's the steak frites, of course, a burger, buffalo wings, a chicken sandwich, chicken nuggets, fries, an empanada, and a variety of sauces. Lori Jayne also sells the occasional special. That day they offered a sort of riff on the cheesesteak. Next, I explored the beverage offerings, and there was a decent variety. Lori Jayne is situated in a bar after all. There was a list of original cocktails, wine, and beer. What captured my attention was the summer special frozen drink, which happened to be a frozen coconut margarita. I got a single, and it hit the spot. The beverage was well balanced and had a refreshing and pleasant flavor. I was a bit concerned that it could have been too sweet, but that was thankfully not an issue. The drink also packed a strong punch of alcohol, which I appreciated. Soon enough, my food arrived. I got an order of buffalo wings and, of course, the steak frites. It all looked pretty good, but first I turned my attention to the buffalo wings, which besides the steak frites is also one of the most ordered dishes at Lori Jayne. Now those were some fine buffalo wings. In fact, Lori Jayne's offering puts most of the other buffalo wings that I've had to shame. First off, the meat was nicely cooked. It was juicy and flavorful. Really though, that dish was all about the sauce, and that was some tasty buffalo sauce indeed. The sauce was tasty and rich, and there was a bit of spice to it, but it was nothing too dramatic. One of the unique things about Lori Jayne's buffalo sauce and why they call it Buffalo 2.0 is the addition of 2 cheeses, which include Grana Padano and blue cheese. The cheese not only added some nice funkiness to the wings, but also a bit of texture, as there were literally chunks of it in the sauce. To sum it up, those were some delicious wings, and were in fact among the most unique buffalo wings that I've ever had, which was largely due to that excellent sauce. For those who want to more deep dive into those wings, I would recommend checking out Bon Appetit's video, which features Chef Sam Braverman preparing the dish. Next, it was time to try the creation that brought me to Lori Jayne in the first place, the steak frites, specifically the steak frites au poivre. Now, I've had quite the roller coaster of experiences when it comes to having steak au poivre. The last time I had the dish was at the popular La Renommée in Paris, and it was hands down the greatest steak au poivre that I've ever had. However, before my visit to La Renommée, I literally had the worst version of that dish at Balthazar in New York City, which featured a steak that was so tough I felt like I was cutting through a cinder block. Lori Jayne's offering at least looked promising. In fact, it looked very tasty, and I couldn't wait to dig into it. With chopsticks? Yeah, Lori Jayne serves their steak frites with chopsticks, since the dish was partly inspired by the streets of Chinatown. Regardless of the serving utensils, that dish delivered. To put it simply, Lori Jayne's steak frites lived up to the hype. I loved it. First off, let's consider the steak itself. The restaurant uses 5 ounces of USDA prime chuck flap. Now 5 ounces isn't a lot, and the dish as a whole would probably only work as a light meal for most. The steak though was tasty. It had good flavor and was cooked to a perfect medium rare. If you wanted it well done, tough luck. Lori Jayne only cooks their beef one way, and thankfully, in my opinion, it's the proper way. I will say that the beef was unfortunately a bit tough, but luckily that's mitigated a bit with how thin it was sliced. In fact, the more of the steak I ate, the more those chopsticks made sense, as I was easily able to pick up those delicate slices instead of roughly poking them with a fork. The highlight of that dish was hands down the au poivre sauce, which was packed with flavor. It was nice and rich and had a slight tingle from the Szechuan peppercorns, which displayed a bit of the Chinese influence of the dish and made those chopsticks seem like more of a natural fit. Overall, that was a fine steak au poivre, but of course there was also the fries, which I enjoyed as well. They were nicely seasoned and had such an excellent crisp to them. I also liked combining a bit of the au poivre sauce with the fries, which I actually would have liked a bit more of for that purpose, but as it was, I was still very satisfied with everything. To sum it up, that was an enjoyable dish with a great price, which these days goes for $28, although the other version of the dish with the miso chimichurri sauce is $1 less, and I'll definitely have to try that next time. Now, the price is clearly a bit more than the $20 the dish went for back in 2024, but there's obviously been some unfortunate inflation since then. Nevertheless, I still think that today's price is worth it. After finishing both the wings and steak frites, it was time for dessert. Unfortunately, I didn't see any desserts listed on the menu, and when I inquired about the subject with my bartender, he said that there weren't any. What a shame. I still had space in my stomach, so I ordered a burger for dessert. Yeah, that was clearly not the sweet treat that I had in mind, but I do love burgers, and it looked pretty good. It contained Lori Jayne's special sauce, pickles, and caramelized onions. I also paid a bit extra to add cheese and bacon. Now that was a pretty solid burger. In fact, it was much better than what I was expecting. The beef was formed into a thick patty that was nicely cooked to a medium rare, and it was juicy and flavorful. In terms of the toppings, I loved the caramelized onions. In fact, caramelized onions are one of my favorite burger toppings. They lend such a nice sweetness to what was overall a savory creation. The cheese was good and the bacon was flavorful, plus that bacon had such a great crisp to it. However, as great as bacon is, I probably wouldn't order it next time as it slightly overwhelmed the other elements on the burger. Overall, I was impressed with that creation, especially considering its price tag of $15. However, if I didn't add the bacon and cheese, it would have only set me back $11, which is a great deal, especially when you consider what a burger costs from spots like Five Guys. Out of 10, I would give that burger a 7.7. After finishing my dessert, it was time for the bill, which totaled to $81.66, but with my tip, I spent just under $98.
So that was one fine dinner. Lori Jayne, their steak frites, lived up to the hype. Their all poivre sauce was fantastic, and I think it's what really made the dish, but the quality of the meat was much better than what I was expecting, especially for what it was priced for. You know, you see a lot of these viral foods on Instagram and TikTok, and a lot of them do actually live up to the hype, but at the same time, there are so many of these foods that just look good, but don't really deliver on flavor. Lori Jayne's steak frites just delivers on all fronts. Now, even though the steak was what brought me to the restaurant, I actually really enjoyed all the other food I had. That is definitely above average bar food. The buffalo wings were awesome, but that burger, that really impressed me, especially for the price. I do wish the restaurant had a dessert. That was the only thing, because I would love something sweet right now. Something sweet and cold, like some ice cream or something along those lines. At the end of the day, however, that's no big deal because I still had a great time at Lori Jayne. Now, I'll definitely have to go back one day to get the chimichurri steak frites, but for today, I'm pretty satisfied. To sum it up, I had a fine meal tonight at Lori Jayne. Their steak frites lived up to the hype and they offer great value. Without question, I will definitely be returning to Lori Jayne.